Sorry. So let's talk about the data stack first, and then why do we need automatic governance? So some use cases, and then what we actually do and how we are doing it at the moment. Just a little bit about me. I'm Patricia Goldberg. I am originally from Brazil, but I've been living in Germany for a while, and I did my master's there and just stayed in Germany. I am data analytics / engineer at Vemolo. I do basically everything. Vemolo is a small startup at Munich. And this is my dog, by the way, Luna. A little about the stack. This is a quite common stack. So we have a lot of sources, just 3 here, but we have a lot of sources. And then we use Python in the middle. We have an orchestration tool, which is called at the moment Daxter, which is this little guy in the middle here. And then the data warehouse is BigQuery. And we have a BI tool at the end here, which is connected directly to BigQuery. This talk specifically is going to be about this stack. The source is Personio, the most important source in here, because I'm talking about permissions as well. And to get the permissions, I need to see which users do I have. And the user I have is actually my employees. So Metabase, at the moment, we do a self-service analytics. Does everybody in my company have access to Metabase? And I need to see which this person is, what's the status, what's the position, what kind of data this person can have access to. And obviously, we have to have our orchestration in the middle so I can control everything and when to do what. So I kind of spoil a little bit. One main point of this talk is about the permission and how we gave automatic permissions, right? So we have at the moment 250 employees, and these employees can change positions in the company, and they may not be able to see everything. So accounting data, so it's not supposed to be seen by sales, for example. So there are some restrictions in that. This means if there is a new person coming in, right? This person is entering as sales, and the position is lead. In my BI tool, it would have access to the collection of sales, specifically for sales, and the permission would be probably edit and view, right? It's a lead, probably can also edit, but probably if it's an intern, you cannot edit, just view. So this is type of permission that I'm saying now. Another point is documentation synchronization. So we have a lot of table, a lot of data. And as is self-service analytics, anybody should be able to see what we are showing to them. So any KPIs, anything like that. And we have already documentation, so we have to sync this to the BI tool as well. So whenever somebody wants to see this column and description of this column, so it's a column, the source is the database, and the metrics is using, for example, one specific KPI, I just sync the descriptions that I already have it in my database, in my repository, to the BI tool, so the user see a nicely, here, yeah, a nicely description of each column, each table. And lastly, not least, is query adjustments on schema changes. This may be not so useful for every moment, but there are some point in times that you might want to change the column names or the table names. My company, for example, we passed through a rebranding, so any table that used to have the name of the previous company had to change to the new company. Imagine doing that for every table that you have, every question in the BI tool that you have. It's a lot of overhead. That's how we came up on this also third part of the automating tool. We had the column name, probably with the old company name. And then what I want to do is the selected statement instead of the old name to the new name. And again, this is not a repository. This is a BI tool, right? So it's not simple as Control F and then Control R. So it's not simply replacing. We need to go to the BI tool and change everything. All right, so let's go to the first one, automatic permission system. We have two parts in here. First, we need the data of the employees. The data of the employees we get in our HR system, which is called Personio. Here we get the team, the email, the position and the status, if, for example, is active or is inactive, so people that already left. And we sync this to BigQuery, our main warehouse, daily. Normally, the people do not change the positions more than once in a day, right? If you have a promotion, it's probably once every 6 months or every 3 months. Okay, so the persona we're calling here as source. This is because we are not changing anything in persona, we're just getting the data from persona, and that's it. Let's talk about the source.py then. This is mainly done in Python. What we define here, we define a stream, basically how we can connect to persona, a URL, like how to connect to persona, and then parse the data in our class. And now we can inherit this stream here. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we just inherit in here, and then any new tables that we want. So we only get employees, but if you want to get organizations from persona and so on, we just expand in here what we have, and we pass the specific endpoint that we want. This is quite normal. And then in here, we authenticate specifically persona. This is all off. We just have the client ID and the secret. Great. So we have our persona data. This is already in BigQuery at the moment, right? We're just syncing. But now we have to update metabase. So we have one part, but we don't have the other part, which is updating really the permission system in metabase. In BigQuery now we have the permission groups, because this is coming from persona, which is actually the status and team and position of this person. This is the permission group that we call in metabase. And here, this is a tricky part. We update every 5 minutes. This may be weird, but just because a person can enter metabase at any point in time in the day, so they can just log in, right? This is also possible, but when they log in, if they don't have the necessary permissions, they don't see any data. So basically, metabase is empty. That's why we do it throughout the day. So if a new person is just entering metabase because they want to find out new data, they will have the data maybe in 5 minutes. They have to wait a little bit, but they will have the data. That's why we decided to do this every 5 minutes. Okay, so persona was for us a source because we're just getting the data. But metabase is actually a resource for us because we are actually updating metabase frequently. Now I'll talk about a little about resources. Resources in here in this setup is we're using actually Pydantic, and these configurable resources here, this class, is basically inherited from Pydantic, the base model. So Pydantic, whoever doesn't know it, is just a validation library in Python, which actually validates anything input from the user. So I have an input to this resource, which is my API key to connect to metabase, and Pydantic is just this verification here if everything is correct in this validation, in this input level. That's simple. I have a client, that's fine. And this is where we get a GET request to get active users at the moment in metabase. So I have the ID of this user in metabase. And here I'm actually doing a post request to update the group IDs in metabase. So with the user, I can update the group IDs. This is where the permissions come in, right? So this is where I'm updating the permissions. Obviously, we have now connected, but we're not doing anything, so there's no logic in it. And the logic comes now in the schedule. It's actually 2 parts of the schedule, right? So we call jobs anything that has logic in it. We have the resources, which is just simply how to connect to something, and the job has the logic inside it. Okay, basically we have the persona data just in BigQuery at the moment, so just getting from BigQuery. This we have the metabase active user, so now I'm doing a GET request to the metabase API in here using the resource metabase. And basically I'm merging these 2 information together using the email. The persona data has the group ID because it has the information of sales and the lead sales, for example. And the metabase only have the ID of the user in metabase. With that, I simply update the permission groups in this single line. Lastly, we just defining here the repository that my metabase is my resources using any API key here, and updating here in a cron job every 5 minutes. This is the last step. So that's it from the permission side. The documentation, it's a bit easier because we didn't have to implement it. We had a library that's out there. It's called dbt metabase. We use dbt as the main data build tool, transformation tool. Whoever doesn't know, just look it up. It's a data build tool. And dbt has the structure of adding the documentation in YAML files. So I already have the documentation of each table, and then I can add some metadata for metabases specifically, and this library syncs everything to me already to the metabase. So we do this daily, and whenever we change something throughout the day, any table, anything, we can sync as well. Mainly what we have in here is exactly what you see in metabase. This is metabase. And lastly, how we can actually adjust the schema changes. So any column names that you change throughout the years, right? I mean, we have metabase resources. You can think about we can just use the same resources. That's absolutely correct, because from the resources we can get the ID of the columns we want to change. With the ID of the columns we want to change, we just rename the columns. That should be it. But metabase has its limitation, the API specifically, and we don't have an endpoint to get the columns of one table. So if I'm renaming all the columns in one table, I basically have to do this call of the full database. And at the moment, we have 2,500 columns in BigQuery. So metabase would return this. This takes around 20 minutes to run just to get this endpoint, right? That's fine for one column, but if you're changing 100 columns, which we actually did before, this takes 3 hours more or less, a little bit more. And then this is why we have to improve a little bit the metabase resource. So this is basically the same resource as before. The thing in here is that we have cached ID. This is a private attribute from Pydantic, starting with like the underscore. Meaning this is not an input, will not be validated by Pydantic, but I am using throughout my code in my find ID here, find ID method. What I'm doing here. So the first time, if I don't have anything cached, so the first column that I'm renaming, I do get all the database, so all the columns, which is in this endpoint database. And then I cached everything in my cached in here, cache ID. If I do have it, so my second column renaming will not go again to the metabase API. It's just cached and just getting the ID from my dictionary in here. It's a design pattern called memoization, by the way, if you don't know it. So this makes it way faster. We still have the first time to run, obviously, but then the second execution is just like getting the dictionary in memory. And that's all.
Yeah. All right, let's do questions, guys.
It's a BI tool, so business intelligence tool. Not similar to Tableau, but Tableau is the most common one. The difference is Metabase is open source, and we self-hosted, and we basically do self-service, so it's easier to use for any type of user. Obviously, the users that know data, it's easier to use than anybody else, but yeah.
By the way, having this metadata in YAML files is really good because you could feed it to chatbot and have assistance to find certain things.
Yeah, there's things we are looking for at the moment, yes.
Yeah, it works amazing.
Yeah, actually The paid version of Metabase is already doing that with the YAML file description in dbt, but we don't have the paid version, so we are doing kind of open source version of it. Yeah.
But it's not only for Metabase, just having YAML files are helping.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, coming.
So what I understand, you're only using BigQuery, and your whole tool is based on BigQuery to change columns and sync metadata, right? What about other mass data warehouses?
You mean if we use it or if you research it?
Yeah, both.
So we don't use any other data warehouse, use our databases, like transactional Postgres, for example, is a data database. Data warehouse is mainly BigQuery, that's it. We did research other ones, but BigQuery just works. Like, we don't have any problem with BigQuery. Yeah, that's why we decided for BigQuery.